key leaders from the US, China, and Russia notably absent from this COP conference, raising questions about the perceived urgency from some of the world's largest economies. Hello and welcome to another special coverage of COP29 on Green Growth TV. This pivotal finance COP, as it's been termed, is being held in Baku, Azerbaijan. The summit unfolds amid a complex backdrop of geopolitical tensions and an ever-growing sense of urgency as the realities of climate change intensify. Globally, this COP also takes a very unique context in place. We have key leaders from the US, China, and Russia notably absent from this COP conference, raising questions about the perceived urgency from some of the world's largest economies. And then again, the venue choice is an oil-rich nation, which further challenges the expectations of COP29's ability to facilitate meaningful dialogue on fossil fuel transition. So as we can see, the stakes for this COP29 is very high and they have never been higher. Joining me to explore these critical questions is Jessica Bigley, Policy Lead for Global Climate and Health, who is actually presently in Baku live at the COP29 conference. Thank you so much for joining, Jessica. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much, and I'm doing well. Really glad to be with you today.
Thank you so much. How are things over there at Baku? I hope everything is going smoothly and you're enjoying the conference so far.
Yeah, things are absolutely off in full swing right now. So glad to be able to connect.
Yeah, all right. So let's just get right into it. As we know, the COP29 conference has been termed the finance COP. So with a major goal to establish a new collective quantified goal, that's the NCQD, which just took place, which just started up now on climate finance. What are the main ambitions for this goal, and how should we expect that the NCQD is able to address the urgent needs of developing nations, as well as the urgent health needs of nations that have been vulnerable to climate impacts? What should we expect from this new NCQD in that particular aspect?
Thank you. Yeah. So the first thing to say on the climate finance discussion is that climate action is health action. If we aren't financing climate action, then it is going to have absolutely catastrophic implications for human health. Historically, we've seen that developed countries have committed to provide $100 billion a year to developing countries. This target was due by 2020. It wasn't met until 2022. So not only are we behind in terms of time, but also because of the inaction that we've seen historically on climate change, because it hasn't been adequately financed, the numbers that are needed are now so much higher. So the financial commitments that we need here at COP29 are in the trillions, not in the hundreds of billions. We are off track to meet the mitigation target of the Paris Agreement. We know that we are extremely close, if not on the brink of exceeding the 1.5 degree target that was included in the Paris Agreement. We're also off track on adaptation, which is what the Global South needs most urgently right now. They are already facing the hazards of climate change, and loss and damage finance, which is needed to address the impacts, which are unfortunately already happening. So in addition to thinking about the trillions that are needed, it's really important that these trillions of dollars are provided in the right ways. So we need a sub-target on mitigation, on adaptation, on loss and damage to make sure that all those three aspects are adequately addressed. We need mitigation to reduce the pace at which health hazards are increasing. We need adaptation to protect people against those health hazards when they happen. And we need loss and damage finance to respond to the health needs of those communities that have been impacted. We also need to make sure that that finance is based on grants and not on loans, because we know that when countries have to repay debts that are incurred from high interest rates, that debt is linked to poverty, and poverty leads to disease. So we need to break those cycles of debt and poverty and of ill health. At the same time, we know that there are over $1 trillion that are invested each year in fossil fuel subsidies, which are driving the health costs, they are driving the climate crisis. And if these fossil fuel subsidies could instead be invested in renewable energy subsidies, we'd be maintaining healthy energy access for people. It would be energy that does not cause the same burden of pollution as we get from fossil fuels, and it would yield huge health savings because of the health impacts of climate change and fossil fuel dependence that would be avoided.
All right. So, like we said earlier, there's the absence of you've already pointed out that there's a lot of needs from this conference. There's a lot of expectations, but like it's very obvious, most of the world leaders, like for instance the U.S., the China, they're absent from this, and there's this many things that need to be achieved. Now, with the absence of one of the world's largest economies at this COP, do you think we'll be able to achieve this? And does he send a message that it seems as though this conference is not being taken seriously as it should? And how do you think these goals will be met if we don't have this important people on ground at this conference?
Absolutely. So the US has withdrawn from climate discussions in the past, and action has carried on. So it's really important to focus on the fact that the actions of this one country are not going to define the response of the world. We've seen other parties, other countries step up in the past in defiance, and we need to see the same now. And anyone that thinks countries aren't turning up to COP29 are not yet informed. There are over 90 national leaders that are here in Baku, and more ministers will also be coming. So there is representation from around the world at lower levels in the US, albeit not from the head of state. We know that African and other global South leaders will be here, and they'll be clear about what they need, and that is a strong finance goal. We've seen floods in the Sahel, we've seen floods in East Africa, there's been drought in Southern Africa and extreme heat across the continent, and those leaders know exactly what is at stake, and they know what to call for in terms of the levels of climate finance that are needed. There are rich country governments that are here to get the job done. They're sending ministers, they're sending delegations. It might not be glamorous, we've not got show ponies here, but there is hard work going on, and that is absolutely still happening.
All right, that's great. So now, as we know, Azerbaijan is it's currently hosting the COP29, like we've pointed out. But then it's a major oil producer, and what role do you think it will play in climate negotiations as regards transitioning away from fossil fuels? And how do you think it will be able to effectively drive conservation and transitioning away from this? How do you think that would be able to balance out? Can we really expect much on that particular aspect?
So in COP28, we've seen the foundations laid for more ambitious action on transitioning away from fossil fuels in energy systems. That was the language that was agreed at COP28. It's more ambitious than we've ever seen before. It's not yet ambitious enough, so there is certainly pressure on the leaders of COP29 from around the world to deliver progress on that commitment. We need action from the highest historical emitters that have driven the emissions that have caused the health and wider impacts of climate change that we see now, both in Africa and around the world. Those countries have also profited from the activities that have driven those emissions, and therefore it's crucial that they also finance the action that needs to take place in other countries which may have less resources and are at the same time more vulnerable. And finally, we need the fossil fuel industry out of the climate talks. It's absurd coming from a health background where we know that the tobacco industry is banned from the international tobacco control negotiations. And yet here at COP, we saw 2,556 representatives from the fossil fuel industry on the ground at COP28. And we really need parties to step up and separate the participation of the fossil fuel industry from the UNFCCC processes.
Okay, so while the COP28 president was giving his opening speech yesterday, he mentioned that the new Global Catalytic Climate Fund, which was launched, is actually gaining a significant momentum. So, in what ways do you think that COP29 can accelerate this momentum, and what would a robust, effective NTQD look like in practice to ensure that this actually gets to the level it's supposed to get to? What are the expectations we have at this conference for that particular initiative?
Yes, so we really need to make sure that the ways in which the finance that's allocated under the new collective quantified goal is distributed to the communities that most need it, and that it's distributed in ways that serves the priorities of those communities, not in ways that serve the perceived needs that people that work at the global level might have of how that finance has to be used, but that responds to the real needs of real people. And that there are mechanisms for channeling it to those communities.
So now let's look at it from the aspect of health, which I know is your specialty. How has discussions on climate health so far in this conference, has it increased, especially in the international fora over the past years? What follow-up is needed during this COP session to improve commitments pledged to ensure that we better climate health internationally?
Yeah, so again, like the first and foremost priority is ensuring that there is finance for healthy climate action overall. But as you said, the momentum has really been building on health. So in terms of some more health specific, not necessarily more health important, but more health specific areas of follow-up at COP28, we saw the adoption of a dedicated declaration on climate change and health, which is the first time we've seen this in the COP space. And it's really put health on the radar of negotiators in a way that we haven't seen before. We've seen that transition occurring in some of the preparatory meetings in the lead up to COP, that these connections really are being made by the people that are defining these policies. Now that we have this declaration, which is much more comprehensive than we've seen previously in international policymaking spaces, in terms of the sectors which it covers, because we know that outcomes for climate and outcomes for health are absolutely dependent on mitigation and adaptation in the healthcare sector, but also across sectors, because we can't have populations that are healthy if we don't have clean air, which relies on mitigation in the energy sector, if we don't have healthy diets, which relies on resilient agriculture systems, if we don't have physical activity, which also offer win-wins for reducing emissions. So it's really important that the Climate and Health Declaration did broaden the discussion. It didn't, however, contain rigid follow-up mechanisms. So what we really want to see parties gear towards the 151 parties that endorsed that declaration. We want to see them talking about how they can follow up, how can they report, how can they share good practice on what they've been doing to address the intersection of climate change and health, and make sure that the best decisions are made for the populations that they represent. There will be an announcement of a COP continuity coalition from the presidencies of COP26 through to COP30 to talk about how health can be more deeply and consistently integrated into the UNFCCC space. So we hope that they will have news for us on that front.
Okay, so let's take a short break now, and when we come back, we'll look from the aspect of adaptation and resilience, which seems to be a part that has been overcome by mitigation. So please stay with us, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying tuned. So we have with us Jessica Bailey, who has been giving us updates on what's happening at COP29. You're still watching the COP29 special coverage on Green Growth TV. So now back to looking at we're looking now at the aspect of adaptation and mitigation. Yesterday, the COP28 president, Mukhtar Babayev, in his opening speech emphasized that adaptation has not received the same attention as mitigation, because when you look at climate crisis, there's some things that you just can't change. You just can't handle it. So there needs to be proper adaptation measures to ensure that you're better prepared for these things. So now, when we're looking at that, what specific adaptation plans and resources would you suggest that needs to emerge from this conference to address the specific gaps in climate resilience, especially for healthy populations and populations that have been prone to this climate crisis?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing to mention is the importance of planning on this, and there are tools for governments to think through how their adaptation actions can serve populations. So first of all, the World Health Organization has produced excellent guidance on how to conduct a vulnerability and adaptation assessment for health at national level to find out what the needs of populations are and which parts of the population are most vulnerable. There is also guidance from the World Health Organization on how to integrate health into national adaptation plans. And some of the actions that we might want to see across sectors are in the healthcare sector to make sure that healthcare facilities can continue to provide care even in the face of a climate crisis or a particular extreme climate-related weather event. To do that, they need to know which needs are going to exist so that they can build capacity of healthcare professionals to make sure that that care can be provided, that they can make sure that the right medicines and technologies are available to provide that care. In addition, we need better surveillance systems so that the health system is warned when a particular climate threat is approaching, or if the conditions are right for the breeding of mosquitoes that carry malaria, just as one example, so that foresight aspect. In other sectors, we know that we need resilient food systems so that they continue to produce food to nourish populations. In sanitation, we know that if people don't have access to resilient sanitation systems, that we're going to see the spread of waterborne disease. If there is a flood that overwhelms existing drainage systems, as an example, and that water sources are polluted. Equally, if there's a drought, then people are currently forced to depend on sources of water that aren't safe and do carry that risk of waterborne disease. We know that we need safe homes, resilient homes, that will protect families during a climate-related extreme weather event. So yes, absolutely, we need resilient healthcare sectors, but we also need resilient water and sanitation, we need resilient agriculture, and we need resilient living environments.
All right, so now let's also look at the aspect of public enlightenment. What strategies do you think COP29 can employ to make the public understand that climate crisis is as critical as economic pressures? Because right now, even though there's a lot of talk about COP29, not many people understand why it's important. Not many people are bothered about following it. So what specific measures do you think we need to put in place to understand that people know how important critical and critical climate crisis are, as well as economic pressures? How do we also address the misinformation and the polarization that hinder effective climate action in this particular situation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the media has a huge role to play here, because so much of what happens in the UNFCCC negotiations can seem detached from reality until there is support and assistance to translate these deeply technical negotiations that have such real life implications for people. So first of all, thank you to you for hosting this discussion. But I think there is also a broader conversation around the funds that are available in the climate community for partnering with PR agencies and really making sure that the message gets out there. We know that the fossil fuel industry invests a huge amount in PR, and as a result continues to have an influence in these discussions. And the wider climate community needs to be able to follow suit to get the priorities out to the public.
I also want us to look at the situation, the initiative that came up in the last COP28 with the global energy storage sixfold by 2020. We had countries that said they were aiming to increase global energy storage sixfold by 2030. So what are the immediate steps that COP29 should take to support this goal, especially for regions that are transitioning away from fossil fuels?
Yeah, so we know that we need better energy storage enabled to be able to transition to renewable energy, because while solar energy is absolutely a viable option in many parts of the world, wind energy is. The sun doesn't shine all the time, the wind doesn't blow all the time. So this is why this energy storage discussion is such a crucial one. Something to really emphasize from a health perspective is that as we make this transition, we're going to need to extract more of certain metals to make batteries that can store this energy for when the sun isn't shining or when the wind isn't blowing. And it's really important to put safeguards in place that mean that when these metals are extracted, that they don't cause a burden on local communities, that they don't increase the health risks that are faced by those local communities because of occupational hazards or pollution-related hazards that happen because of the extraction of those metals.
All right. So finally, I just want you to give us your final thoughts on everything that's happening now, and what more do you expect to see that you haven't seen at the conference? Just your final takeaway on the program.
So once again, just to re-emphasize that although health might not be explicitly on the negotiating agenda at COP29, every decision that gets made here by governments is going to have implications for human health. So we really need governments to consider the health of their people and the populations that they are responsible for, and to deliver ambitious climate action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for joining the program. It was a pleasure to have you. As COP29 continues, expectations remain high for impactful commitment, especially around establishing a new climate finance goal, that can address the urgent needs of developing nations. The discussions around adaptation, energy, storage, and technology transfer, they're all evolving. And so there's much anticipation for concrete actions that will ensure equitable support and global resilience. Green Growth TV will be here throughout the summit. We'll be offering insights, updates, and expert interviews, of course, as we follow the journey of COP29 and its potential to shape a more sustainable future. Thank you so much for joining once again. I'm Tonya Gubanjo. Till next time, do take care.